All right, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Linda Rose-Krasnor, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. I'm serving as chair of the Pheo Alliance Board of Directors, and I'm also a paraganglioma patient with an SDHD mutation, along with several of my close family members. I'm located in Southern Ontario, Canada, and I'm very pleased to be here with Dr. Jaydira Del Rivero, and I'll introduce her more formally in a few minutes. This program is brought to you by the Pheo Alliance, whose mission is to empower patients with pheochromocytoma, paraganglioma, their families, and medical professionals through advocacy, education, and a global community of support, while helping to advance research that accelerates both treatments and cures. Before we get into today's topic of clinical trials, I thought I'd remind people of a few upcoming events. Our monthly peer support meeting will be held on Tuesday, August 6th at 4:30 p.m. Pacific time and 7:30 Eastern. Our 5th annual PheoPara Awareness Week will be held August 26th through August 30th. Watch social media this month for information on what we have planned and how you can download your very own PheoPara Detective Toolkit and solve some mysteries presented during the week. On September 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, the Alliance will hold a special live educational event called Separate Facts and Fiction, patient education section at the historic Mark Twain House in Hartford, Connecticut. And just a few hours later, we will have our annual PheoPara Gala at the same location. You can find more information and sign up for patient-focused events and buy tickets to the gala on our website, www.pheopara.org. Today we'll start with a brief presentation that I will do on clinical trials, and then Dr. Del Rivero will present for about 30 minutes. We're going to share some videos from patients who have participated in clinical trials, and this will be followed by a question and answer period with Dr. Del Rivero. We will ask questions submitted beforehand, and you can also type your questions into the question and answer box, which is accessible from the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to have all questions answered if time allows. And many people will ask questions of variations of the same question, so listen carefully for questions that are similar to your own. We prefer questions that are general and less case specific, and that would be much appreciated. Just a reminder that the information presented on this webinar is for educational purposes only and should not substitute for the advice of your doctors and medical team because they have in-depth knowledge of your own medical history and current situation. Amy, if we could start the PowerPoint, or that would be great. And just, yeah, so what are clinical trials? Clinical trials are a special form of systematic and targeted research that is focused on evaluating the safety and effectiveness of medical innovations. That may include drugs, that also can include medical devices or treatment protocols. A clinical trial differs from regular research in its high degree of oversight and regulation of the process. You'd want to move to the next slide, Amy. And the extent to which the health of participants is monitored, the methodological rigor of its design, and the phased progression of the research process. As you can see here, there are 4 phases of clinical trials, and I'm going to skip this slide because Dr. Del Rivero is going to talk about it in more depth a little bit later. Just wanted to mention a couple of common features of clinical trials. One is that they typically have a number of ways of reducing bias or confound in the results. One of the ways that researchers do this in a clinical trial is through random assignment of participants to groups. There are typically 2 or more groups of participants in a clinical trial. One group receiving the new innovation and the other group receiving a standard care There may be more groups, but typically there's at least 2. When participants are randomly assigned to groups, differences between groups kind of average out, differences that are not thought to be important in determining the outcome of the trial. That means when a participant enters a trial, they don't know which group they're going to be assigned to, and it's a matter of chance. Researchers also sometimes use a double-blind procedure in which both participants and researchers don't know who is receiving the new treatment and who is not. The group that is not receiving the treatment may be given a placebo, which is thought not to have any effect on the condition, or may receive the standard normal care given to people who have the targeted condition. Another characteristic of clinical trials is that patient health is very carefully and regularly monitored during the trial. That means that often patients will have more tests and more observations and more clinic visits than they would in the normal standard care. If researchers determine through this observation that any harm is coming to patients as a result of the new treatment, that trial will be discontinued. Patient participation in clinical trials is always voluntary, and patients are given a great deal of information about what to expect in the trial, about the risks and benefits of the trial, and about their rights during the trial. Each clinical trial also undergoes a very thorough review by research ethics boards. And sometimes the enrollment in the trials is highly restricted so that patients have to meet a number of criteria before they are allowed to participate in the trial. Further, clinical trials are often difficult to run and very expensive. It can take 10 or more years for a drug to go from lab results to approval for use in the general population. And a large majority of these promising drugs that appear in early clinical trials don't make it to FDA or other government approval. There are a number of reasons why clinical trials may fail. The drugs just don't work, or the intervention doesn't have any effect. The side effects are not manageable, or the researchers cannot get enough participants who meet their criteria to participate in the trial. And for rare diseases, it can be very difficult to find the numbers needed to have a successful clinical trial. Okay, next slide, please, Amy. Clinical trials offer patients a number of benefits and risks. One benefit is obviously access to innovative treatment that they may not be able to get otherwise. Often patients consider their participation in clinical trials to be making a contribution to science, a contribution to others in their community, a way of giving back to pay back in some way for the treatment and consideration that they themselves have received in the past. There's also sometimes a monetary compensation for participation in trials, which can be an incentive. There are also a number of risks in participating in clinical trials. Of course, we don't know the outcome or the effectiveness of the new treatment or drugs or procedures. Often patients report they're afraid of what side effects may happen or how they may change as a result of their participation. Often involvement in a clinical trial involves more time and effort and sometimes more expense than participating in traditional care. Patients who, because of the double-blind procedure, may not know if they're getting the new treatment or not, or whether they're indeed getting any treatment at all. And sometimes patients report feeling like a guinea pig, that they're being potentially also exploited by big pharma, and that can be an uncomfortable feeling. Next slide, please, Amy. So where can you find a clinical trial? You can sometimes your physician can inform you, but there are a number of very effective search tools to find trials anywhere in the world that are focused on Pheo or paras. And we have a link to one of those on our Pheo para website, which we'll show you in a moment. One popular search tool for Pheo para for clinical trials is a database that's maintained by the US government and can be found at clinicaltrials.gov. A second is a database maintained by NIH, which looks at clinical studies, most of them centered around Bethesda, Maryland. And then a fairly new clinical trials database that was developed by INCA, the International Neuroendocrine Cancer Alliance, called ANCORA. And we're going to actually demonstrate that so you can see how easy it is to use. We can get there through our Pheo Para Alliance website, but I think right now we're going to go, yes, thank you. We're going to go directly to the website, Amy, if you could. Take us there on an adventure. Okay, so this is the website. And you'll see the first thing it does is to ask you what condition that you want to see targeted by a clinical trial. On this website, to get to Pheo para, you go to neuroendocrine tumor choice, and then it asks you for your general location, a zip code or a postal code. So let's try New York City, somewhere 1018 maybe. Now, and to use this website as well as some of the others, you go through a series of filters which narrow the search from a broad one to one that's more specifically tailored to your condition or to your need. In this one, you can stop at any time and ask to see results, or you can go through progressive filters. So we're going to ask for pheochromocytoma maybe on this list. And then you can see you can either continue or you can ask for results. So let's ask for results. It gives you a little tip, which you can either continue or not. And you can see on the website that there are, and I can't read it because it's too small, Amy, so maybe you can describe what the results are.
So it says that there are 26 trials found near New York City. And it starts with the recruiting ones. We have it set to up to 400 miles away. We can say up to 50 miles away, which takes that number down to 8. You can further either expand or contract the search area with these options here at the left. And then there are other filtering options by trial phase, trial type, and then we can, of course, say recruiting. And so out of those 8, 7 are recruiting actively right now.
And if you click on the title of the trial, you'll get more information. They'll talk about a description of the trial, the goals of the researchers, what phase it is, whether it's an intervention or observational study, and who the funder is. That you'll also see at the top a rating of how closely the study matches your criteria, from sort of excellent to not very well. And you can go back and do further refining or go back to other studies. So all in all, it's pretty useful. That's a pretty useful tool. So that's basically what some things about clinical trials, where you can find them. And now we're going to hear from 2 patients who have been through clinical trials and get their perspective. And then we'll introduce Dr. Del Rivero and hear her presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is Lacey Coling, and I'm a patient with metastatic paraganglioma, and I'm currently enrolled in a clinical trial at the National Institute of Health at Bethesda, Maryland. I've been enrolled in the trial for just about a year, and I was originally diagnosed with paragangliomas in 2018. I was diagnosed with metastatic paraganglioma in 2023. At the time, like many of you have probably heard before, my care team told me that the only thing left for me was to watch and wait, that there were no treatment options available. This wasn't an answer that I was ready for, and I definitely couldn't accept. And that's when I found the clinical trial through the Pheo Alliance and also connected with the physicians that are at the NIH. Throughout the clinical trial, I've been able to work with a medical team who's completely dedicated to finding and advancing research for Pheo. It's been an incredibly empowering and enlightening experience for me to work with people who are so invested into finding out more information and more research on Pheo. The dedicated medical professionals, the clinicians, the research nurses that are there, everybody is so dedicated to advancing and to your individual care, which is something that I've never experienced before in any of my other medical encounters. I've also been able to find a community of other members who are also in the clinical trial who I'm able to lean on and to be able to talk to about what it's like to live with a rare disease. This disease can be something that's so isolating because others simply just don't understand what you're going through. And being in the clinical trial, I've found a group of people who are able to also understand what I'm going through, they're able to understand the side effects that I'm going through, and we're able to do it together. I'm not sure that every clinical trial is that way, but I highly recommend going through a trial and being able to help advance if there's nothing else for you to do. My progress throughout the trial, thankfully, has been stable, and things are looking good. I hope that you are able to also look into a clinical trial and that today's webinar gives you more information about it. Please feel free to reach out, and I wish you the best of luck in all of your care in the future.
Hi everybody, my name is Sarah Speary and I'm from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I'll be 58 years old in August and I have metastatic pheochromocytoma. I'm very pleased to speak to you today about my experiences on a clinical trial and how it has in fact changed my life for the better. I've made a few notes upon my reflection of what I want to share with you today. Like so many of us, I had a very difficult time finding the right care for my metastatic Pheo, and it was my doctor in Toronto who recommended the Welly-Rig trial for the drug called belzutifan for me. And it was my GP here in Edmonton who referred me to the hospital in Calgary where the trial is being run, which is a 3-hour drive away. I had many appointments in Calgary to determine if I was in fact a candidate for the trial and to make sure I met the right criteria, which was very specific and very extensive. I was given a stack of papers by the clinical trial nurse. It was overwhelming, and I was very nervous. A friend of mine has experience working with clinical trials, and I called her to meet with me to discuss the papers. We sat on our back porch to review the documents line by line, page by page. She said the trial looked magical and for me to go for it. But I was still hesitant. I had that guinea pig feeling. Maybe I wasn't that sick after all. And was Big Pharma just benefiting from me? I had quite a few sessions with my psychologist to discuss going on the trial. She said something that really resonated with me, that it was unlikely that I could roll back the disease at this point, but maybe it would help to stop the disease and stop the progression, and this helped me. When I met with the clinical trial doctor to tell him my decision, I was very emotional. He respected that and all those anxious feelings that Pheo give us. He was so very sweet to me and gave me the encouragement I needed to join the trial. He said, try it, and you can always leave. There's no questions asked. Okay, so I signed the papers and I joined the trial, and I'm very glad I did. I'm happy to say that as of June, I'm on the 2-year mark of my trial, and I continue to be stable. My husband and I drive 3 hours every 28 days for my appointments in Calgary. As this is a scientific study, I'm seen at the same facility by the same staff, the same machines, and the same lab. Every month I have lab work, a consult with my doctor, and I receive more pills, which are dispensed at the hospital by a pharmacist who's been assigned to the trial. At the beginning of the trial, I had a CT scan and a bone scan alternating months, but at the 1-year mark, this shifted to every 3 months. Periodically, I have to fill out a quality of life questionnaire. At the beginning of the trial, I did have some side effects, predominantly low blood pressure, so the doctor decided to move me from taking 3 pills a day to 2, and that seemed to work better for me. At the 3-month mark, my main Pheo reduced by 25%, and I was thrilled. And I've been classified stable ever since. I have had a significant reduction in my symptoms, to the point that I feel so good, I almost forget to take my pills. Having a break from thinking about my disease has been the biggest gift of all. Embarking on a clinical trial is a deeply personal decision. My biggest piece of advice to all of you is to ask a lot of questions of your medical team and those you trust. Thanks for listening to my experience, and I wish you all the very best with your healthcare journey. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. I'd like to now take a few minutes to introduce Dr. Del Rivero, who earned her medical degree from the University of Veracruz in Mexico and completed her internal medicine residency at Woodall Medical and Mental Health Center at NYU. Next came a fellowship at the National Institute of Health, where she was part of a research team developing clinical trials for pheochromocytoma and paraganglioma. As an assistant professor at the Montefiore Einstein Center for Cancer Care, she specialized in endocrine oncology involving thyroid cancer, parathyroid, and adrenal tumors, and clinical research for gastroenteropancreatic neuroendocrine tumors. She subsequently completed a second fellowship in medical oncology at the National Cancer Institute. Dr. Del Rivero is board certified in internal medicine, endocrinology, diabetes and metabolism, and medical oncology, and a physician scientist in the developmental therapeutics branch. She is a principal investigator of the natural history study for neuroendocrine neoplasm and adrenocortical cancer to provide the basis of further development of therapeutic interventions, prevention, screening, guidelines, and endpoints. She is also the national principal investigator of a clinical trial in oncology, assessing treatment protocols for advanced pheochromocytoma and paraganglioma. Her current efforts center on the development of novel treatment approaches and targeted therapies for endocrine malignancies, such as advanced gastroenteropancreatic neuroendocrine tumors, adrenocortical cancer, and pheochromocytoma and paraganglioma. Dr. Del Rivero, welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Rose and Ms. Powell, for the introduction, and also for giving me the opportunity to talk to you all about clinical trials and the ones that are opened in recruitment. And in this session, I'm mainly going to focus on treatment studies. And we're going to discuss a little bit of the difference among different clinical trials as well. So as a little bit of a background, and for our patients as well who is listening to this webinar, one important aspect in the management of pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas is not like one size fits all. There are different clinical presentations of patients that has a diagnosis of pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas, and there is different aspects that we need to understand for each patient that have this type of tumor. As we can see, there is different imaging studies. These imaging studies is a DOTATATE scan or a Gallium scan. And we know that DOTATATE scan is a very good scan for the diagnosis of pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas, but it also tells me which patients may benefit for certain therapies that we will discuss briefly. But that said, as we can see, they have different clinical presentations. We have patients with pheopara that they have maybe localized tumors, as we can see in the scan. So this is the liver. So we have these very dark spots, this evidence of tumors. And as we can see, they're very, very localized, very low volume. But then we have different patients that have a larger volume of tumors. We have more tumors in other areas of the body. And as we can see, we also have patients that have a more of a higher volume of tumors. And it's important to recognize these different aspects whenever we recommend treatment options as well as clinical trials. We need to understand what is the volume of tumors, how many tumors are seen on the scans. We need to understand whether the tumor is functional, meaning that it's producing hormones, in this situation, catecholamines and metanephrines. We need to understand also whether it's slow growing or rapidly growing, so that way we can then guide us how we can treat those patients. And as we can see here in the different treatments of and management of pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas, we have a few treatment options. And we can see that we have from lutetium, from other somatostatin agonists, and from other therapies, including chemotherapies, as well as surgery and other more what we call targeted therapies, or more treatments for localized disease using liver ablation embolization. But as we can see here, there is different options for the management of pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas. And just to, as I mentioned earlier, just to emphasize, is like no one size fits all. We need to understand the tumor presentation of each patient, and based on that, we can then recommend what are the best treatment options in a personalized manner. And in terms of the management as well, we need to understand too, as we discussed earlier, and as I showed pictures as well, whether is the pheochromocytoma is localized, but it's something that we cannot have surgery, or whether there is tumors everywhere in the body. Very important, the initial management of patients with pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas, especially the ones that are very functional, producing tumors. Alpha blockade is very important. And then there may be other medications needed as well to control the excess of hormones as well. One of the questions on the chat that I saw was like what we can do in order to control the side effects of, or the effects of the excess of hormones. Very important to control with these medications, alpha and beta blocker, but at the same time, understand where the tumors are located and what we can do, whether it's surgery, whether it's systemic therapy, whether it's local therapies with ablation embolization. So I think it's important to know what is the clinical presentation of the patients to then guide what is the best treatment option. We had an FDA-approved agent, which is MIBG, but unfortunately, as many of you may know, this is the company who used to make MIBG, or high specificity MIBG, is no longer making that. We still have what we call more of a standard MIBG, currently in a clinical trial at New York City at Memorial Sloan, and we can discuss briefly about that. But as earlier discussed, what clinical trials are. So we know that these are studies that test how well new medical approaches works in people. Each study tries to find better ways to prevent, screen, diagnose, or treat a disease. Clinical trials may also compare a new treatment to a treatment that has been already available. And the goal of the treatment, or the goal of clinical trials is to determine if treatment approaches are safe and effective. Briefly discuss earlier what is the different phases of clinical trials. So there are different phases, and I think it's important also whenever you see your doctor and a clinical trials is offered to you, it's also important to know which phase of the study is and what is the goal of the study. Phase 1 is a study that is to determine safety. There are very few participants involved on the phase 1 studies, about 20 to 80 participants, depending on the science of the study. But it's important to recognize that the phase 1 study is to determine safety, if the drug safe. At the same time, is to determine what is the best dose, or the maximum tolerated dose that the patient can get, to then move to the phase 2. Now, once we have the best dose, and once we understand the safety, so then we move to the phase 2. Phase 2 is to still study more of the longer term effects of this drug, but at the same time is also to determine whether this drug works in a specific tumor type. And that's a larger cohort of patients. Then phase 3 is to understand, once we know that there is certain efficacy, meaning that it can work in a specific tumor type, phase 3 is involve a larger cohort of participants. At the same time, is to further understand its efficacy long-term, as well as safety, before it's then approved by the FDA. And then there are studies that they have more like a phase 4 once the drug is approved by the FDA, so that way we can understand more of a longer term effects, more of a surveillance in patients that has received the drug. Now, it's important to understand why we're doing a clinical trial. What are the questions that we want to answer? And usually in every consent, it describes what are the main objectives of the study. And when we say primary objective is the primary question that we want to answer. And that's part of the clinical trials development. So primary objective is, like I say, the most important question that we want to answer within the clinical trial. It could be, for example, if this specific drug could shrink tumors, whether this drug can stabilize the tumor for certain periods of time. So that's kind of like the primary questions regarding to the clinical trial. And secondary objective is other questions that we would like to answer as well as part of the clinical study. Other questions could be, for example, quality of life, whether this specific drug by decreasing the amount of hormones could that make me feel better. So those kind of like secondary questions that we want to answer, but there's usually a primary question that we want to answer with the clinical trial, and then other questions that we would like to answer. So this is this is just I will describe a little bit more in detail. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because this has been some of the results that were published this year. One is by Dr. Fojo. Maybe some of you may know Dr. Tito Fojo, and another study was reported this year by Dr. Camilo Jimenez. And this is the drugs that is within the family, what we call tyrosine kinase inhibitors. So what these drugs are, these are drugs that blocks the blood vessel supply going into the tumor. It's usually a pill that is taken every day. And as we can see here, these results were reported today, and this is part of the clinical trial that was reported this year. As we can see here, each line, as we can see, it represents one person. And this is what we call a water flow plot. This is kind of how we sometimes describe so how we can, as a medical oncologist, how we look at the data, how we make interpretation of the data, how do we know these medications work. And as we can see, just to go back, one lunch represents one patient, and the negative numbers is how much the drug is able to decrease the tumor type. So as we can see, axitinib, and this study was led by Dr. Tito Fojo, is able to decrease the tumor size in some patients that were included on this study. And the same with the cabozantinib. Cabozantinib is a study that was led by Dr. Camilo Jimenez. So you can see that this is again another type of water flow plot. And as you can see, these lines represent one patient, and you can see the number of how much the tumor was decreased that were seen on the CT scans or MRI. So, and this is indicated. Now, we know that the tyrosine kinase inhibitors is part of the treatment options for pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas, and we know that these are usually in tumors that do not, and a scan called MIBG is not positive, but also in those tumors where maybe growing a little bit more rapidly, and we need to stop the growth, and also in those patients that has some bone marrow toxicity, meaning if the blood counts, the white blood cell counts, the red blood cells counts are low. So sometimes this could be an option as well in between therapies that we know can affect the bone marrow. So this is very similar study of what we discussed at the same tyrosine kinase. This is called sunitinib. This was published this year by Dr. Baudin. Dr. Baudin is in France, and he's a well-known pheochromocytoma and paraganglioma expert in Europe. And he also reported the efficacy of sunitinib. So sunitinib was able to also shrink tumors. At the same time, it was able to also stabilize the tumor for a period of time. And this is just kind of like some of the results that were published this year based on clinical trials. Now, I would like to discuss also natural history studies, because whenever we think about clinical trials doesn't mean that there are treatment studies, all of them. It can also be natural history studies. It can also be prevention studies. There is different type of clinical trials. And even when earlier, when they mentioned about the clinical trials available by Ancora, it also reports other studies like a natural history study or imaging studies as well. There are many studies in pheochromocytoma and paraganglioma that are imaging studies specific. So there are different type of clinical trials. Not all of that indicate that it's a treatment study, and it's important also to recognize that. And natural history studies are important because natural history studies allow us to follow patients over longer periods of time, also allow us to collect very detailed information on the patients, very detailed medical history, allow us to collect blood and certain other tissues, blood, saliva, as well as tumor samples as well. Sometimes these studies allow us to do a biopsy, and a biopsy in a patient with pheochromocytoma and paraganglioma can be done as long as they are very well blocked. So because I know that that's some of the questions that I get, not only for patients, but only for providers. And researchers who conduct natural history study use this information to understand how the specifics of the cancers, how it form, how it grow, how it spread. So those are the questions that we want to answer, whether there is the specific genes that can be run in families. They can also, we wanted to understand how we can prevent it, and as well, how we can develop the better therapies for neuroendocrine tumors. And with that, at the NIH, we do have a natural history study for all neuroendocrine neoplasm, and pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas is a type of neuroendocrine tumors. And the reason why it's a type of neuroendocrine tumors is because it has the capacity to produce hormones. At the same time, it has very specific markers that is look under the microscope that make them a neuroendocrine tumor. But this study is available at the NIH, and we collect very detailed personal family history. We wanted to understand also how certain drugs works in patients, and we follow these patients over a long period of time. And this is a history that hopefully can help us answer many of the questions of how pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas occur, and whether we can develop any prevention guidelines with this. How the way clinical trials work at my institution, and the reason why I'm saying here is because we do have quite a few clinical trials for pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas, but the way we see patients here is either the patient itself or the referring physician refer patient to us. We collect all the clinical information, pathology, imaging reports. We as a team, we have a multidisciplinary team, we review all the information given to us, and then we decide whether this patient can be considered for the natural history study, or maybe this patient can be considered for a treatment study, or we can just consider certain standard of care as well available, and also make recommendations to the treating physician about what are the treatment options available. Now, I would like to touch base a little bit about diagnostics, because those are a few clinical trials for pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas using what we call diagnostics. So what is diagnostics? Diagnostic is a combination of the terms therapeutics and diagnostic. And just to focus a little bit here in this picture, the pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas, this is a tumor cell, this is a Pheo cell. It has receptors on the surface of the cell. So this receptor is called somatostatin receptor. And whenever we give, either we do an imaging study or we do a treatment study, so what happens is that the injection, whenever you get the injection, it goes and binds to the receptor. So I like to discuss this analogy of the lock and key. So basically the receptor is the lock, and then we have the targeted ligand, which is the key. And that kind of like when you put them together and try to open, there is a series of events, and at the end is to kill the cells related to the pheochromocytoma and paragangliomas. So we have two images diagnostics for Pheos and paras. One is the 68 gallium DOTATATE scan, and the other one is the 64 copper DOTATATE scans. Either of them is good. Sometimes I get the question, which one is better? Either of them is good, whichever is available in your near institution or wherever you're treated. And if that's positive, then these patients can be eligible by a type of treatments called 177 lutetium DOTATATE. This is a type of PRRT, because sometimes you may hear what PRRT, and PRRT It stands for peptide receptor radionuclide therapy. Is a radiation, is a type of radiation that is diagnostic, meaning that you need to have a positive scan in order to get the treatment, and that's for the treatment of metastatic disease. And the reason why I'm saying this is because there is an ongoing clinical trial also here at the NIH. It's a phase 2 study, meaning we already know the safety because that was established. So now we are doing a phase 2 study specifically for pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas. The question that we want to answer by doing this study, the primary question is to understand whether by giving this drug could this stabilize the tumor and for how long. So that's what we call progression-free survival, is the percentage of people who did not have new tumor growth or cancer spread during or after the treatment. And that's 4 doses that is given every 8 weeks. In the patients that have benefit of that, we have a retreatment arm as well, so patients can still receive more doses of this. There is other questions as well that we want to answer with this study. We wanted to understand whether this treatment can shrink tumors. We also wanted to understand how this affects the quality of life of patients. We also wanted to understand whether by getting this treatment, could that help patients live longer. So this is an active study currently accruing as well for pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas. Similarly, there's a new study, and this is important to know and understand the difference. So just to let you know, and just going back here, this is Lutathera. So we call this beta type of radiation. And the one that is kind of like the new kick on the block is what we call alpha PRRT. And the reason why it's called is alpha, so it's a different type of radiation that is supposed to be more specific to the tumor, less collateral damage, but that said, we still need to learn about this type of treatment. Also here at the NIH, there is a study with alpha PRRT that includes patients with pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas. This is a new type of alpha, so we still need to understand how it's affecting humans. So it's a phase 1 study. Remember, phase 1 is to determine safety. And that's a study that is also currently available at the NIH. We also have another study with the same agent for patients that already has received prior Lutathera, prior MIBG. So we have the study where we call Lutathera or MIBG naive, and then we have another study that includes pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas that also has received prior radioligand therapy. So that's also open and available here at the NIH. This is more of a phase 1 because we still need to understand the safety, but then once we know and we know what is the best dose, then we move to the phase 2, one cohort for pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas, and the other one is for gastroenteropancreatic neuroendocrine tumors. Now, another study also available, this is a national study. So many institutions within the United States has this study open. For example, Huntsman Cancer Center, Memorial Sloan has this study open. This is a study that I'm fortunate to lead together with Dr. Perez. She's at Dana-Farber, and Boston also have this study open. And it's what we call a randomized study. So patients are going to be randomized to get either temozolomide or temozolomide in combination with olaparib. And the reason why we wanted to do this combination of temozolomide and olaparib, we wanted to understand whether by adding olaparib, we make temozolomide more effective. Could that increase the killing of the Pheo cells? One thing that I wanted to mention too is that all of the studies that I just mentioned until now, every patient received the treatment. It's not a placebo control that we discussed. Even this study, either patient gets temozolomide or gets temozolomide olaparib, so every patient would receive therapy. And again, like I said, we wanted to understand by adding olaparib, could that make temozolomide more effective? We wanted to understand whether by giving this drug, could that stabilize the tumor for how long? That's what we wanted to understand. That's our primary endpoint. We also wanted to understand whether the combination is better than the temozolomide alone. We don't know, and that's the reason why we're doing this study. We also wanted to understand whether this combination could that be better in patients that have mutations. We don't know, but that's another question that we want to answer with this study. And other question that we want to answer with the study is whether this treatment can shrink tumors. We also wanted to understand whether there's any other side effects associated as well, alone or with the combination. We also wanted to understand whether by getting this treatment, could this treatment make you live longer. So that's another study that's currently accruing as well for pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas. There is another one as well with belzutifan. This is a multi-center study. This is driven by Merck, which is a pharmaceutical company, and there is many centers within the United States that has the study open. I'm mentioning here some of them, as we can see here. You see my arrow. I'm mentioning a few centers that has the study open, and they have different cohorts of patients using this agent. Patients with pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas. This cohort is now close to accrue because they're doing interim analysis. And depending on that, what they found, they may either enroll more patients, or maybe if this is something really good, then that may then be presented to the FDA for approval. Another arm is for pancreas neuroendocrine tumors. Another cohort is for VHL-related pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas. That's still open and accruing. And just to let you know, we have the study open available at the NIH. We also have another cohort of HIF2 alpha-related tumors. As we know, some patients with pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas can have this mutation. So this is also accruing as well. And there is another cohort of gastrointestinal stromal tumors. Some patients that have the mutation, succinate dehydrogenase mutations, may have this tumor as well. And we're also including this with this agent. The primary question, and the question that we want to answer by doing this study is whether it can shrink tumors. So that's the main question. Other question is to understand how long is the duration of response. What is also whether this treatment can stabilize the tumor and how long, or whether this treatment can also help patients live longer. Another important thing is the age too. Some of the studies I mentioned earlier includes 12 and above. That said, the one that I mentioned about temozolomide versus temozolomide olaparib, we talk with the children's cooperative group, and we're going to lower the age to 12. So we'll be able to enroll also younger patients too. But this study also enrolled patients 12 and above. The axitinib study, this is a patient that is run by Dr. Pheo. This is a type of tyrosine kinase. Remember earlier that I mentioned about tyrosine kinase inhibitors? This type of medications blocks the blood vessel supply going into the tumor. It's an oral medication. Dr. Pheo is leading the study. He presented some of the data, which sounds very good. So we'll see the final results. Right now is not accruing. I think there is some patients that Dr. Pheo is able to see and give the medication, but that say we're trying to analyze the data and see if so far it looks very good. So hopefully we can take it to the FDA to get it approved, or to understand what will be the next steps. The primary endpoint, or the main question that we want to answer by doing the study, if by giving this medication, could that shrink tumors or disappear? So that's one of the things that we want to answer with these questions. Other questions is to understand whether it stabilizes the tumor and for how long, and as well as quality of life. This is another study. It's called LAMPARA, and the reason why is because LAMP is for lanreotide. So lanreotide is a type of what we call somatostatin agonist. It's approved for neuroendocrine tumors. It's not approved for patients with pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas, but sometimes because pheos and paras are a type of neuroendocrine tumors, you can get insurance approved for that condition. And by giving this drug, we wanted to understand whether it slowed down the growth of tumors. And that's the main question that we want to answer with this study. This patient, we enroll patients, enroll patients here at the clinical center as well at the NIH. And that's one study that soon we're going to analyze the data to understand whether, in fact, this drug can help slow down the growth of tumors. And then there's another study. This is a multi-center study, international, but here at the NIH, MD Anderson is the one, I'm sorry, in the United States, MD Anderson is the one that has the study opened. This is a vaccine in patients with metastatic adrenocortical carcinoma or malignant pheochromocytoma, but is in combination with immunotherapy. why this vaccine? And some of the questions that sometimes I get is like, could a vaccine prevent? Like, because whenever we think about vaccine, we think like, oh, when we help me prevent something. This is not prevention. This is to enhance the immune system to then make immunotherapy more effective. Because in order for immunotherapy to work, I'm sure you have heard on TV like Keytruda, you need to have an immune system, an active immune system to make this treatment more effective. And that's what they want to do with this study. They want to give a vaccine, and then after that, they want to give an immunotherapy called nivolumab to understand what is efficacy. There is a phase 1 because that combination has not been done in humans, so they need to understand what is the safety. And then after that, the results, based on the results, then we'll move to the phase 2 based on specific either pheochromocytomas or adrenocortical carcinoma. Now, these are all other active studies. This presentation will be available on the Pheo Alliance website. So please look into this presentation if you want. There are other treatment options available, 2 within the United States, and there are others that are in China. So if somebody's close to China, so maybe this could be a treatment that maybe could be an option for you. But we do have an MIBG treatment at Memorial Sloan Kettering. This is not your ACIDRA. The ACIDRA was called high specificity MIBG. This is more your standard MIBG. This is ongoing at Memorial Sloan Kettering. This is for patients that have neuroblastoma as well as pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas. They include patients 1 year and older. And the question that we want to answer is whether it can shrink tumors. We talk about this alpha PRRT, just to let you know, even though we have it here at the NIH, it's a multi-center study. So there's many centers within the United States that has the study open, like, for example, Mayo Clinic, UCSF, also in Florida, Moffitt Cancer Center. So there are many centers that have this study open. So it's, and something that you may want to discuss with your physician as well. And there's other studies as well in China. So for those that may be closer to that, this is a study of pembrolizumab, but basically it's another type of immunotherapy. And that's also for patients with pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas. And there are other studies as well to understand whether by giving this drug, would that help shrink the tumor so that way they can make surgery later on an option. So this is just some of the active, and again, these are, besides the one that I discussed, is the active treatment studies for Pheos and Paras. One thing that I do want to mention as well is that there are other studies, phase 1 studies that we call for solid tumors. So meaning that's for all cancer types. So that's the reason why whenever you talk to your treating physician, you need to understand what is the phase of the study, and those are some of the things that we wanted to discuss as well. But there is a, it's important to know that a lot of the phase 1 studies, even though they may include PheoParas, it may not be specifically for PheoPara. What I just discussed with you, it was the active treatments specifically for PheoPara. Now, I wanted to just, this is the last study that I want to discuss, and this is something that where science and patients come together. I'm very proud of the study because this has been for information that we obtained for patients enrolled on the natural history study. We found that there is a protein that is very specific for adrenal tumors, pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas, as well for adrenal cancer. And based on that information, we work with a company to develop an antibody drug conjugated that targets a specific protein expressed in different types of neuroendocrine tumors, but mainly the adrenal tumors. And what is an antibody drug conjugated? So it's a class of drug that combined the target specificity of monoclonal antibodies. So it's a type of immunotherapy. It's not your Keytruda. Those are called immune checkpoint inhibitors. It's not that. It's a type of immunotherapy. It's called a monoclonal antibody that then is bound to a type of chemotherapy, but they have a linker. So it has 3 parts. The antibody drug conjugated has 3 parts. It has the monoclonal antibody. It has a linker that binds to the active drug so that we get into the cell and kill the cancer cells. With that, the idea is will be more specific to the cancers, but and not affecting other cells in the body. So, and this specific antibody drug conjugated binds to a very specific protein is called DLK1. and is very expressed and is expressed during fetal development, but is restricted in adult tissues. And this is DLK1 is highly expressed in neuroendocrine cancers as well as neuroblastoma, adrenal cancers, and other cancer types. And it's important to know because what we found also is that this protein is also being associated with how aggressive some of these tumors can be, and as well as pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas. It can also lead to resistance to certain therapies. Some of the questions is like, I get treatment, and then after a few cycles, it doesn't work anymore. And one of the hypotheses, like, well, maybe the tumor smart the treatment and now is resistant to the therapy. And one of the questions, or one of the hypotheses as well, is that this protein may also be the driver of some of the chemo resistance. And as I said earlier, it's also highly expressed in neuroendocrine tumors. This is just a different information on how DLK1 is expressed in neuroendocrine tumors. And based on, this is just limited data, a small cohort of patients, but what we found is that it's highly expressed on adrenal tumors, including pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas. We can also see here the expression. So these are this is sequencing from patients on a larger database of all tumor types. And as we can see here as well, the expression of DLK1 is highly as well on pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas, as well as an adrenal cancer. We did more studies. This is just very briefly how this work was done in the lab, and Dr. Roper has done all of the studies on of this agent. So now, after we work with the company, we have the antibody drug conjugated. The name is called ADCT-701. Dr. Roper, by using this agent, he using different cell lines, adrenal cell lines, pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas. And as you can see, this is the green one. The green one, by giving this agent, you can see that it kills all of the cells. This is what we want to see. So there's other lines that it keeps growing, but when you give this agent, this drug, you can see that the cells are not growing. This indicates cell growth, but we can see that it's not allowing the cell growth, and it's actually killing the cells. And based on that information, we now have a first-in-human study available here at the NIH that includes adrenal tumors, pheochromocytomas, and paragangliomas, as well as other neuroendocrine tumors. Phase 1, remember, is to determine safety, and then not necessarily efficacy, but because we're very specific on tumor types that we know express this protein, we also wanted to understand if we see a response, how is that related to the expression of this protein, and that's other studies that we're doing. This is something that I'm proud of this because we can see that these are from patients that we have seen in the clinic. We found that there is some commonalities. We took it to the lab and now in the clinic. That said, we always need to understand that sometimes what we see in the lab may not necessarily work in humans. And earlier it was said that not all drugs on clinical trials make it to the approved. It's the percentage is quite small, but at the same time, we're learning from that. We're learning as well for future studies. Now, I only have 3 more slides, but one of the questions is like questions about the trial. So what is the purpose of the study? So it's important to ask your doctor about what is the purpose of the study, why researchers think that this approach of clinical trial may be better than one that I'm using now, how long will I be in the trial, what kind of tests or treatments are involved, how can I speak with about questions I have during the study, who will be in charge of my care, because sometimes the clinical trial team may be different than your treating physician. So it's kind of like those are the different questions as well. Also understand and ask the questions, what are the possible side effects or risk of the new treatment, and what are the possible benefits. Other questions as well to ask your doctor is about your rights. One thing is important is that you make the decision. The clinical trials can provide information, and it's very important that you ask all the possible questions. Knowledge is power, and it's important. Don't ever be ashamed or like, you always need to ask the questions for any treatment, not only for clinical trial, for any treatment that you're provided, you need to ask the question, why this treatment? Is this treatment better than other? Is this clinical trial better than what I'm getting now? What is the question that we want to answer? So it's very important as well to understand about clinical trials, question about your rights as well, how will my health information be kept private? What happens if I decide to leave the trial? So those are the different questions that you can ask. Costs as well. who is going to pay if I take part of the trial, what costs with my insurance, how can I help answer the questions from my insurance company. So there are different questions that you can ask. Questions about daily life. How could this clinical trial affect my daily life? How often will I have to come to the hospital? Patients that come here to the clinical center, they may come once a month for treatment. Sometimes they travel for long distances as well. So I think it's important to understand that. And also, will I have checkups after the trial? So the different questions as well. Tips to ask your doctors about trials: consider taking a family member or friend along to support and help asking questions or recording answers. Sometimes I tell my patients that, before you come to see me, write any questions that you may have. It happens to everyone. Once you're with a doctor, you want to ask so many questions and just completely forget. So it's important to have maybe some of the questions written so that way you can ask those questions to the doctor, and don't hesitate to ask any question. Even if you forget to ask any questions, you can always go back. You can always write your questions and go back as well to ask questions, and then write down the answers as well if they're available when needed, because sometimes a lot of information can be overwhelming, and I can understand that a lot. It can be confused, it can be overwhelming. So if you kind of like have this pattern, it will help you to understand better, so that way you can make the best decision for yourself. Clinical trials at the NIH, please contact us directly. There is a referral line, a fund, and how to take part of the study at the clinical with us at the NIH. We can talk with your physician. You can refer yourself. Care at the NIH is free of cost, and that's something important to acknowledge. And all the scans, all the labs is free of cost. Sometimes the travel may be a little bit if you want somebody to accompany you, but other than that, everybody's taken care by the NCI. This is a very nice information to have. If you want any help or any questions about your disease itself. So there is this, there is a live chat, there is a phone that you can call. They're very responsive, and they really want to provide information about your cancer care, about your cancer diagnosis. I think this is a very good website to go and review. And if you have any questions, also, please don't hesitate to ask me directly, and that's why I have my email there. And with that, I would like to acknowledge everyone involved. So it takes a village. And I like to end with this quote: "Cancer cannot cripple love. It cannot shatter hope. It cannot conquer the spirit." So we're on this together. And the doctors who are treating with this type of tumors are every step of the way. And also I want to thank all the patients and caregivers and families who we are eternally grateful for your selfless courage on unwavering strength, because without your participation in clinical trials, none of the studies will be possible. And with that, I'm open for any questions, and I'm sorry if I took more time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Del Rivero. A fascinating and incredibly informative presentation. Okay, so Amy, do you have the questions?
I do have the questions. Do you want me to give them to Dr. Del Rivero today then?
Sure,
I
could
have
you
them
do that?
for you. Linda, did you have a question that you wanted to start with prior to going into the list?
No, I think I was curious as to what questions a patient who's offered a clinical trial might want to ask their doctor, but that was just covered beautifully in the last minute or two.
Okay, great. So oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, you go.
Dr. Del Rivero, I'm going to go through the list of questions that we have from our patients who registered for today. I'm starting with the questions about today's topic, specifically just to the viewing audience. We will start with these because they're germane to today's topic, and I'm not sure if we'll have time for additional questions because we are already past 11. So we have a couple of questions initially, Dr. Del Rivero, about where and when the clinical trials are conducted. Can overseas patients take part in trials in the US? And then I think you did cover that there are some trials available overseas as well. So would you like to answer any of those questions?
Thank you, Amy, so much. So the questions, if I can ask the question again, so just want me to kind of like in terms of availability of clinical trials in United States and outside United States, is there a specific question? I mean, one thing that I covered earlier was about all the available clinical trials, active and accruing.
Right.
And one thing to discuss as well, as I say earlier, is that not all of the clinical trials, even if you go clinicaltrials.gov, not all of them is treatment studies, meaning that you can get a drug. Some of them are observational studies. Some of them are what we discussed, natural history studies. Some of them are prevention studies. Some of them are imaging studies. Some of them are genomic studies. So there's different types of clinical trials that help us understand not only the biology of patients with pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas, but at the same time also to understand whether certain therapies are effective. In my talk, I discuss of all available treatment options in the United States and overseas. There are some of them overseas. I think that some of the treatment study that was also in Europe was cabozantinib and was sunitinib, and that data was also reported. So we know it's a treatment option. So it's good to see, even though we have recommended to some patients, it's good to see that in fact it works. And it's important to discuss with your patients when, you know, that treatment option will be an option for patients. I think it's important because what I say earlier is like no size fits all. I think it's important that we discuss with your treating physicians all the options and what makes the most sense, because I do think like the treatment of pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas is personalized from patient to patient based on the different clinical presentations that we see. Patients with succinated hydrogenase mutations, as we know, they have only tumors on the head and neck area. Some of them has in other areas. And it's important to acknowledge some patients that had tumors on the head and neck, they may not be a surgical candidate. So based on where they're located, whether we can give something that can shrink the tumors and maybe later surgery be an option, that's something to discuss as well. And there's some treatments that can potentially shrink tumors. I'm not saying that it can shrink to every patient, but it's a possibility that they can shrink tumors. I think that's important to acknowledge as well. I don't know if that answered your question.
It did in part. So if I'm a patient that's living in another country where there isn't a trial near me, or for whatever reason, I think I'd like to participate in a trial in the United States, can I, as a foreign national, come here and participate in a clinical trial?
Yes, at least I can tell you here at the NCI, so it may be different from other institutions. Here at the NCI, we are able to treat patients from anywhere. One thing that is required is to be able to have a physician outside of the NIH to help me follow together, just because there may be certain situations where they may need to go to the emergency room. The NIH is a research facility, but we treat patients, of course. But at the same time, there may not be like an emergency facility that needs to be seen like within an hour or so. So that's why sometimes it will be good to have somebody else besides us, just to work together in partnership. So that way, if something's an emergency, then we can certainly provide the right guidance. And sometimes for patients that may not live here, that may be of a cost as well. So I just wanted to understand that. But that said, yes, we can see patients from anywhere in United States or outside of the United States. One thing is that I'm always, at least me personally, I'm always willing to talk to even the treating physicians. Like I mentioned earlier, there are treatment options. It's just to decide sometimes what makes the most sense. Sometimes it's a question, but that said, I'm always willing to talk to your treating physician in order to provide any guidance about what treatments options makes the most sense based on the clinical characteristics and what we see on the scans as well.
Great. So the next question is a little bit more specific. My oncologist has referred me for a trial that is not specific to PheoPara and requires periodic biopsies. What are your opinions about trials that are not specific to paraganglioma and or have ongoing biopsies as a part of the protocol?
Right. Yes, that's an excellent question. Some studies, especially phase 1 study, and the reason why phase one study, some of them phase 1 study requires a lot of biopsies. And the reason why is because phase one wants to, as I say earlier, the main goal of the phase one is to understand safety, but also what the drug is doing in your body and is doing in the tumor. So sometimes on this phase one study will require biopsy. Even on my study, I have 2 to 3 biopsies during the duration of the study, just because we wanted to understand how this drug is affecting the tumor cells. And that's why we wanted to do this biopsy. We learn by doing that. We learn what may work because that's kind of like part of the understanding of how this drug works overall. At the same time, I understand sometimes the question is like biopsy, but in a patient with Pheos and paras, as long as they're functional, I mean, they're producing hormones and they're very well blocked, the likelihood that can have an hypertensive crisis is not very high, but it's something that, you know, is important that your doctor knows and making sure that you have the right medication for that. But biopsies is not necessarily contraindicated. I know that sometimes you heard that biopsy is a no, because it can cause some, you know, by doing that, it can release some cells, and those cells can cause some hypertensive crisis. But as long as it is very well blocked with blood pressure control, it's okay and safe to do. And especially in patients that have more of advanced metastatic disease, because sometimes by doing a biopsy, and that's another question that I sometimes get, is could we do a genomic testing, and based on the gene, could we target that gene? Because there are medications for that as well. For Pheo, since it's a rare cancer, we still don't know, even if there is a mutation that we can target with drug, how that's going to work overall for every patient for Pheo. We really need to do a study for that. But that said, it's always an option when we don't have any other options available. And going back a little bit on the question as well, is that about whether it's specific or not for pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas. Like I say, phase one are usually for all type of solid tumors, because it's not necessarily to determine its efficacy, is mainly to determine safety. But that said, you can see some preliminary efficacy as well. And it's important in these studies as well, because it can help us understand overall, you know, how these drugs work and in certain cancer types, and how these drugs works overall. That said, it's something to explore. And like I say earlier, when I put my questions, it's important to ask the question like, why this versus another treatment? Why this versus another trial, specifically for pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas? Sometimes as a treating physician, we recommend a therapy that sometimes we think it makes sense, because maybe something that is found on the genomic of the tumor, maybe something that we think that it may be helpful, but that's important to ask your primary physician, like I say earlier, the possible questions.
Okay, great. That was a really thorough answer. Thank you for that. Another question, are there any vaccines in clinical trials to prevent Pheo for people who are prone to develop it due to genetic mutations?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I mentioned this on a study that was earlier. No, we don't have any vaccine as a prevention. And it's a good question. I think eventually that will be something that we may want to do. I mean, and especially knowing for patients that have the mutation, like succinate dehydrogenase mutation, could we do something to prevent tumor growth? I mean, that may be a good research question. Right now we don't, but certainly something that maybe later on will be explored in that sense.
Okay. Another person asks, and I'm just going to say, among the trials that you discussed today, are there any for metastasized pheochromocytoma which do not react on FDG, MIBG, or gallium-68 DOTATATE scans?
Mm-hmm. So if we have a patient that have metastatic pheochromocytoma and paraganglioma, which is not avid on any FDG PET scan, meaning on any functional scans meaning FDG PET scan, gallium DOTATATE scan, or MIBG. So in that situation, we know that if it's not positive on MIBG, will not be eligible for MIBG treatment. If it's not positive on the 68 gallium DOTATATE scan, will not be eligible for lutetium. But that say, as long as we prove that is when we biopsy or when we have the information that these pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas, there are other options that can be given, like chemotherapy, like the combination of CBD, like temozolomide. We discussed about that, clinical trials as well, or we can also discuss the tyrosine kinase inhibitors, even though it may be negative on all different scans, because we have seen patients with PRRT that may be negative on MIBG, may be negative on the DOTATATE scans. So that means the radioligand therapies may not be an option, but that say we still have other options, including clinical trials that can be a possibility for the patient.
Great. Well, that's good news for that patient. Another question, metastatic Pheo post-CVD and post-PRRT ×1, so I'm assuming one course. In lymph nodes, chest, and abdomen, doctor wants to biopsy to redo genome. Is there a clinical trial that may be appropriate?
Yes, there's still more options. So we discussed about CBD, we discussed about Lutathera, I think, as a one cycle. I assume, and again, important, we discussed earlier, this is what I'm saying right now is not a medical advice. This is just for education purposes. But that said, if a patient has a one cycle of Lutathera and then we see growth, I assume that's the reason why maybe the doctor wants to do a biopsy just to see whether it's anything else that can be targeted with therapy. But that said, sometimes it can be done. To me, when I recommend a biopsy is when I feel like the behavior of the tumor changed, meaning that it was relatively slow growing, and then I see like a rapid growth, and it's like, well, what's going on there? So sometimes, I like to biopsy to help me understand whether whether we can target something, even though, like I said earlier, we need to do studies in order to really prove that is efficacy, but at the same time, maybe may help me understand that maybe we need to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of therapies, maybe another type of chemotherapy like temozolomide. Tyrosine kinase inhibitors can be an option as well. And we have 3 different types of tyrosine kinase inhibitors. We have axitinib, cabozantinib, and sunitinib. And just to let you know, they can be given even back-to-back, because we have seen that if patient has response on one of the tyrosine kinase inhibitors, you can still see response in all their tyrosine kinase inhibitors. So those are 3 options that can be considered in patients with PRRT. And we have been proven by other cancer types that even with a different type of drugs, we can still see some effect. The same with, we discussed about the clinical trials as well can be an option too, like the phase 1 study that we have, and other options as well, the alpha PRRT. If the tumor is positive on Lutathera, maybe not given another, if it's in the growth, maybe another dose may not be an option, but maybe consider an alpha PRRT, and that's a study that is ongoing as well for PRRT. So there are many different options to discuss, and that may be something that needs to be as well discussed with your treating physician.
Okay, so I think this question will be the next to the last, and then I have a brief last question. We have a couple of questions from people who are carriers of a mutation and want to know if there are studies that include them, like for example, the natural history studies or observational studies. They have not yet developed disease, but of course want to know if they would be valuable as a research subject.
When I was doing my research, because I wanted to include all clinical trials available for this talk, I did see observational studies, and I saw studies that include, mutations like succinate dehydrogenase mutation. I think it will be good to go to that clinicaltrials.gov and see where it is that is doing the study. I do think that, the studies has been done. I know here at the NIH, Dr. Carl Patzak did that for long periods of time. That's how we were able to understand how succinate dehydrogenase mutations behave and how often we need to do scans and so forth. I think we learned from all those studies as well. And based on the question, if not tumors, but it's a carrier, I do think when I was looking at clinical trials, like I say, I saw a study for that. Maybe just go there and see whether it's closer to you, but they exist.
Okay, great. And then the last questions, I'm just going to kind of sum up. We do have, and I want to just acknowledge these people. We have some people writing in the box, and I have a couple of questions offline about foreign nationals that are interested, if they have want more information about how they can get involved in a clinical trial study, would you want them to contact you or just contact the NIH directly?
Yes, I'm always available, so you can contact me directly. So that's why on the presentation you have my email. They can contact me directly, but there is also information to contact the referral office as well. So because sometimes by doing that, they may also have other options as well. My studies are very specifically for pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas, but there may be other phase 1 studies or other studies as well of interest. But yes, the patient can email me directly, and I can then put them in touch with the right people to start gathering records and scans and to determine the eligibility for our treatment studies.
Okay, that's perfect. Well, thank you for the questions, Linda. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for all the questions. And I'm sorry we didn't get to them all, but hopefully you can use the websites to find trials that might address particular issues that you're having. So in closing, wanted to thank Dr. Del Rivero for your time and for your commitment to our patients. Thank you. Thank you very much. This webinar will be available in a few days on YouTube and on the PheoPara Alliance website. I just wanted to note too that Dr. Carol Pasek's resignation from NIH, and wanted to recognize the huge contribution he has made to PheoPara research and to patients over many years. We were reassured to learn that he's going to continue to have an association with NIH, and we are especially happy that he will continue working with the PheoPara Alliance, including his role as chair of our medical advisory board and as a member of our board of directors. So we are happy about that, and we wish him well in his in the next phase of his career. Amy, do you want to take a minute to show where the link to Ancora is on our website? And
I do have that page up.
That's that, just so that you know, I'm here at the NIH, so I'm willing to see patients. My focus is mainly on advanced metastatic disease, but I'm here to see any patients as well.
Good to know. Good
Yeah.
to know.
I'm Dr. Carol Patsak, but you know, it's a big shoes to fill. But that said, I'm hoping that I can still follow the same in terms of following these patients and given the adequate treatment options.
Excellent. Excellent. That's
And we're so grateful for you.
yeah.
So this is the clinical trials page on the website. To get to it, you would click on Learn and Clinical Trials. So on this page, we talk a little bit about how important the development of new treatments is, and we rely on clinical trials for this process. It's an extremely important process, and we thank everyone who has taken part in a clinical trial to help us get to where we are today. If you scroll down on the page in a little window, we do have the embedded version of the Ancora.ai website that Linda showed you earlier. This one, you can only choose neuroendocrine tumors. So that part's done for you. You can enter your zip code. So I will, for example, do mine and find trials. So this will take you, I don't know why it doesn't like my zip code. Anyway, this will take you then through a series of questions. And I do want to let everyone know you can just skip through them. You don't have to answer these questions, but you can. You can just go straight to, again, show results, and it will give you all of that information in this little window. And you can click on the trial. It'll take you to the main website where, again, you can be put in contact or learn more about these about the objectives of the study and the exclusion and inclusion criteria. Again, that's through the Learn menu on pheopara.org.
Thank you. And also on the website, you can sign up for our e-news and follow us on social media and find out all the good stuff that's happening. Today's webinar was made possible by the generous support of people like you. And if you find webinars like this valuable, you can donate to support the program at our website, pheopara.org. Finally, thank you to everyone who attended today, and we hope to see you during Awareness Week, and where you can help decode the mysteries of the PheoPara universe. So